Pop quiz. What do these three franchises have in common with each other? This isn't a particularly hard quiz. I mean, you clicked on this video, so you saw the title and the thumbnail. You have at least some idea of what we're going to be talking about today, but the specifics are a lot. Let's begin today with a peek into the history of the comic book industry, shall we? Back in the wilds of the 1980s, the comic book space was very different when it came to licensing. A lot of companies wanted comic books made about their characters, almost exclusively just to sell toys of them, but still, comic books were a very good vehicle for that, and Marvel was way more open to taking those sorts of contracts. This led to the company publishing a lot of books about characters that were not technically theirs. Micronauts, ROM, even larger properties like Godzilla all got Marvel Comics, and Marvel did not have exclusive rights to those characters even though their name was on the comic book cover. These sorts of books absolutely still get published today. In fact, at the time of this recording, Marvel's doing a new Godzilla crossover next week. But there's a very, very key difference between licensed comics of today and licensed comics of decades past. Not the main characters, but the side characters. And now, I'm not a lawyer, and I cannot tell you exactly how the rights negotiations went behind the scenes, but regardless of how exactly we got to this point, there was a very interesting quirk of Marvel's licensing agreements with other companies. Sure, Marvel would only get to keep the licensed characters in their world for as long as the terms of agreement were still established, but any characters that Marvel made in those comics themselves, those were fair game forever. This was especially common in Marvel UK, the publishing imprint serving the United Kingdom, obviously. While Marvel UK was part of Marvel and their stories were connected to the Marvel Universe, they often got to operate somewhat independently, publishing their own comics too with varying levels of oversight, I'll put it that way. Enter characters like Death's Head, who is... I mean, it's kind of difficult to give you a quick summary of how he works because this video, this nearly 40-minute video, that is the summary of how exactly this character works. He's Marvel, in fact, he's Marvel for most of his history, but Death's Head is also other things. And I don't mean that there are variants of him in different realities, I mean that this one guy specifically has been to a lot of different places over the decades. Kind of long intro today, but for a very justified reason, because this video is going to be so narratively strange that there are three things I need to establish before we actually get into the lore. One, this part will be quick. Death's Head, while a good name for a character and very cool to see written, is kind of difficult to say, especially in the middle of a sentence where you are saying a lot of words very fast, as I tend to do. So just for my sanity and yours, I'm going to be calling him DH throughout a lot of this video. Not for every mention, I just want to establish that nickname right at the beginning though, so we're all on the same page. Secondly, we need to establish my personal knowledge on the topics that we will be covering. First, Marvel. Great, I know a lot about that. It is absolutely my area of expertise. I would call myself a Marvel expert to at least some degree, so yeah, I know what we're doing there. Doctor Who, also very good. I wouldn't call myself an expert per se, but I do enjoy the show very much. I've seen most of the modern one and a little bit of the older stuff, so while I might not know everything, I absolutely have the foundations down and am a Doctor Who fan, because I know people will inevitably ask, my favorite Doctor is 12. And then Transformers. I mean, I've seen Transformers 1, and that's about where my core knowledge of the franchise ends. Please don't be mad at me, I have nothing against Transformers specifically. In fact, it actually seems very cool, and a lot of the more recent comics are on my reading list. But also, I don't have time to get into literally every single pop culture franchise that's out there, and when I was growing up, I was much more of a Power Rangers kid. All that to say, for the Transformers parts of this video, I did try my best to get the lore right, but there are probably tiny details that are going to be a little bit incorrect, and when I get to those, inevitably, you are welcome to correct me in the comments. In fact, I want you to. I want to learn more about it and get my stuff right. But also, I'm new and I'm trying my best, so don't be a dick about it, you know? Last thing that we need to establish in the intro is the way this video is going to present the timeline. As you can probably assume already, the canon of Death's Head is absolutely a mess, full of retcons and changes and wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey stuff, this time in a very literal sense. To try and compensate for that, I'm going to be presenting this history chronologically by publication, not by the character's actual story in universe or universes. So we are not actually starting with DH's origin, though we will get there eventually. Unfortunately for me, this does mean that I need to begin the video with Transformers, but on the other hand, maybe it's good to get the franchise I know the least out of the way, so let's jump into it. Death's Head first makes an appearance in The Transformers, the Marvel UK version of course, issue 113. This comic is a direct follow-up to Transformers the movie released in 1986. So direct, in fact, that it begins with a several-page recap of how that movie ended for anyone who didn't see it. To skim over the parts of this that are most relevant to what we'll be talking about today, the movie establishes a new leader for both factions of Transformers. The Autobots get Rodimus Prime, and the Decepticons get Galvatron, who is an ascended version of Megatron modified by Unicron. I think. Again, I know the least about this franchise and I'm sorry. Galvatron loses the fight against Rodimus Prime, but he does survive. The comic shows Rodimus throwing Galvatron into space, but he doesn't have time to go pursue him because Unicron is still attacking, and so he has to go deal with that. This is where the comic book picks up. Sometime after Unicron is dealt with, Rodimus puts a bounty on Galvatron's head and then sends that out to basically anybody who might respond to it. One of the beings who responds is a never-before-seen character named Death's Head. Now, this comic has basically no interest whatsoever in exploring DH's origin. Like I said, we will get to that later, but in the Transformers, all we are given is the most baseline information about him. This does include a couple things that are important to note, though. For one, Death's Head is not a Transformer, nor does he have much, if any, direct connection to Cybertron. He is basically just an independent alien robot, and robot is the correct term. This is not a guy wearing a suit, it's also not a cyborg. Death's Head is a purely mechanical being. He is, notably, Transformers sized though, so he's way bigger than human scale, which I bring up because this will become a plot point later. Most vitally though, Death's Head is not a bounty hunter, at least not in his own wording. This is where we get into the first of his little personality quirks that makes him a more interesting character. While he is a bounty hunter by really every conceivable metric, he hates being called one, and instead insists that everyone refer to him as a freelance peacekeeping agent for certain financial remuneration. From there, all the foundational information we get has been given to us. There's a bounty on Galvatron's head, and DH wants it, so he flies to Cybertron and starts interrogating some former Decepticons as to their master's whereabouts. He ends up fighting them, of course, establishing in the process that in this world, Death's Head is a known figure. This is his first appearance, and we don't get any of his history, but these Transformers know who he is, so he has some level of reputation. This reputation is clearly well earned too, as the freelance peacekeeping agent is able to get the information that he needs and finds out that Galvatron has fled back to the distant past of 1987. So for anyone like myself who is not super familiar with the Transformers lore, yes, the movie and subsequently this comic are happening in the distant future, but by this publication standard, it was the distant future year 2007. Using his own time tech to chase down Galvatron, Death's Head appears in 2007, where he immediately kills Bumblebee, which wildly does not get addressed for several issues. He is later rebuilt, but yeah, there's a time in here where Bumblebee was just like a pile of scrap on the ground. Much of the next few comics are kind of just one gigantic fight scene. Galvatron arrives, gets into a big conflict with the past, or I guess technically at the time at present Transformers, and then Death's Head and a few other future characters catch up to him. While DH is definitely not a good guy at this point, he is just an independent actor hoping to cash in on the money, he teams up with the Autobots present and future to fight Galvatron and is very important in that battle, but he doesn't stick around for the end of it. About halfway through this, Death's Head and Galvatron get into a big 1v1 that DH is actually losing, but this gives the Autobots time to regroup. Once Rodimus Prime is back and ready to fight, he acknowledges that maybe this random alien bounty hunter is too much of a risk to have around since he's only on their side in this specific situation. So he overrides DH's time machine and sends him back to the future. And then, Death's Head is just not in this arc anymore. He has served his narrative purpose and will not be seen for several more issues. When he is seen again, he is really pissed about this whole situation. See, the bounty hunter was vital to the Autobots' victory in this fight. It's likely that they would not have been able to beat Galvatron without Death's Head interfering. But since he was vanished away from the scene before Galvatron was actually brought down, he didn't get any of the bounty he was there for. He is so livid about this that in DH's next appearance in this series, he has completely flipped sides and is hunting Rodimus Prime as revenge for slighting him out of the money. This is not a major arc, it's only 2 issues long, and Rodimus absolutely does win, but the important part is what happens at the end of it, because Death's Head actually ends up being on the good side of the Autobots, relatively speaking. Rodimus, in a very tactical move, acknowledges that while Death's Head can be kind of unpredictable, he is a good bounty hunter. After all, he did hunt Galvatron successfully. So he says, hey, yeah, last situation was bad, how about you do another job for me, hunting a couple of rogue Decepticons, and this time, since you did get slighted, I will pay you some of the money in advance. DH happily accepts this deal. This puts the bounty hunter on track to his final arc in the Transformers universe, as his hunt for the Decepticons leads him to a restructuring Unicron. And now, I mentioned Unicron briefly earlier, but for anybody who clicked on this video exclusively for Marvel and or Doctor Who, Unicron is like one of the biggest bads of the Transformers universe. He's a Galactus ripoff. I know some people are probably going to be mad at me for saying that, but that's absolutely what he is. He's a big, scary, planet-eating guy. This iteration of Unicron is a weaker one, as he still seems to be rebuilding from his previous defeat, but he is still able to mind control Death's Head and force him into his army, which DH is not happy about. He eventually manages to break out of Unicron's domination in a very cool looking sequence, I like the art on this page a lot, and joins the Autobots in their assault on him. Not because he's a good guy, he is still definitely not that yet, but his previous bounty is incomplete, he wants to finish it, and the Autobots are his clients. As usual, DH just wants to get paid. Then, Unicron explodes, and in a weirdly abrupt ending to DH's time in the Transformers universe, he just kinda tackles his targets into a time portal, which happened to be nearby. The portal sends these 2 Decepticons, who, by the way, were named Scourge and Cyclonus, I don't know if those are names that Transformers fans will be excited to hear, into the Transformers world in some other time, where they get to continue being Transformers characters. But Death's Head just kind of goes somewhere else, and the comic acknowledges it basically by doing what I just did, which is skim over it with no detail. The final panel just says, but of Death's Head, there was no trace. From this point going forward, he's not a Transformers character anymore. Death's Head never appears in a Transformers property again, making his exit just as strange as his entrance, really. Truly, all that DH is in Transformers comics is just like a random alien guy who showed up with no history or context, did 2 or 3 bounties for Transformers, and then left because of a time portal, and that is it. Of course, though, given that this was a time travel thing right at the end, and I mean, I already talked several times about the 3 different franchises we'll be going over in this video, I think you can guess where we're going next. So you know how I mentioned just a minute ago that the 2 Decepticons Death's Head was traveling with ended up back in their normal Transformers timeline, but then DH just kinda didn't do that? The official canon reason why this is the case is that as he was traveling through the time stream, Death's Head crashes into the TARDIS. This is not a reference, this is not a cameo, this is not like an implied thing where he crashes into something undefined that looks vaguely like the TARDIS. No, this is a comic book featured in an issue of Doctor Who magazine. After getting into this time travel car crash, DH and the Doctor, the 7th Doctor to be specific, just kinda land somewhere nearby to hash things out. Now, remember how I said that Death's Head was like a Transformers-sized guy and that would be a plot point later? It's time for that to become a plot point. Death's Head is really, really big, especially compared to the Doctor. And while the Doctor is objectively the most dangerous foe that DH has ever faced, I mean, for a guy who was just fighting Transformers, he certainly doesn't look that way, and so Death's Head goes aggro instantaneously. Thinking quickly as he always does, the Doctor whips out a gadget, specifically a thing called the Tissue Compression Eliminator, which is actually something that we saw in the show. It's a weapon that the Master uses to shrink his opponents down, and I guess the Doctor just snatched one of them at some point. Using this on Death's Head, he does in fact shrink the robot, but he shrinks him to about normal human size. This, of course, still means that the cool, heavily weaponized robot does have the advantage in an all-out fight, and the Doctor shortly surrenders. Of course, it's the Doctor, so he has something up his sleeve, but for DH's purposes, his opponent has given up his time machine. The Doctor happily shows DH into the TARDIS, and I'm going to take this page to showcase another quirk of Death's Head as a character, because I think this scene showcases it very nicely. DH tends to ask a lot of questions in normal conversation, and he always ends them with the word yes. You can see that a bunch on this page alone, and it gives his voice a very distinct feel to it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to edit this well, but just to give you a sense, I will certainly try.
So, in return for your life, you'll give me your time machine and show me how to work it, yes? Not that I don't trust you, yes, but I'll feel happier if you accompany me on my first trip. Surprise me, yes? Love it when they run, yes? But must never forget I'm a businessman, yes?
It's a fun little detail of his writing, and for the cult following that DH has as a character, this specific vocal quirk is an immediate neuron activator. I know there are people out there who will see this kind of phrasing and immediately be like, ooh, Death's Head, that's a Death's Head thing. Anyway, getting back to the plot, once both entities are aboard the TARDIS, the Doctor does some signature Doctor quick thinking, inputs a random time and location into the TARDIS, and then sets the controls to instantly target the nearest mechanical organism and transport them to the designated coordinates, which does work, and Death's Head is gone, no longer a problem for the Doctor, at least for now. His time in this universe is not quite done yet. Of course, because this can't truly be random, the place where Death's Head ended up was Earth. Earth in the far future of 8162, but Earth nonetheless. A fact that the Doctor does actually lament, as he kind of likes Earth and does immediately regret sending a scary alien robot there, but whatever, that's kind of a normal day for him. At this point, you might think we've arrived at the point where Death's Head is visiting the Marvel Universe, or at least a very weird future of the Marvel Universe. But no, not quite yet. I promised this video would have 3 franchises in it, but now we're at what is kind of the secret 4th franchise that this character appears in, that being random isolated stuff that Marvel UK did. The character's next appearance would be in a series titled Dragon's Claws. It was published by Marvel, but was never directly connected to the Marvel multiverse, except by weird pseudo-canon proxies such as Death's Head, really, that's about it. I'm not going to go into huge detail on this series because Death's Head is only in 1 issue of it, technically 2 if you count an ominous appearance on the last page of the issue before the one where he actually matters, but Dragon's Claws was set in this weird dystopian sci-fi future of Earth, and the Dragon's Claws in question were a team of competitors in a scary futuristic dystopian blood sport kind of thing. DH arrives in this universe because it's where the TARDIS arbitrarily sent him, but he's not super bothered by this and quickly starts doing what he does best, that being bounty hunting. I mean peacekeeping, or whatever he prefers people to call it. DH only interacts with the main characters of Dragon's Claws like 1 time, however, he does not then immediately leave this universe. Instead, he sticks around in this reality long enough to get his first self-titled comic. Enter Death's Head the series, which stars the title character running his own bounty agency in Greater Britain, which is the world that Dragon's Claws takes place in. The Transformers are not relevant in this at all, because the Transformers don't exist in this universe, and probably legally would not even be allowed to due to licensing. You see why this character was worth a YouTube video? And if you think that this is the point where the series is going to calm down in terms of licensing weirdness, no, we are just getting started. We haven't even gotten to the most complicated era yet. That would begin in issue 8 of Death's Head, where the Doctor shows back up. Yeah, there's not even a long period where Death's Head gets to be his own guy. He gets looped back into the Doctor Who lore on issue 8 of his own series. This happens because he gets hired as a bounty hunter to kill the Doctor, which I'm sure that's going to go great for him, right? The guy putting out this bounty is a weird green guy named Josiah W. Dogbolter. I don't know why his name is Josiah W. Dogbolter, but you better believe that I'm going to be calling him Josiah W. Dogbolter every single time, because Josiah W. Dogbolter is one of the stupidest names I've ever heard for a big evil green supervillain. To assist his chosen assassin in hunting down the Doctor, Josiah W. Dogbolter provides Death's Head with what I can only describe as a time jetpack? Using this wild device, DH is able to track the Doctor down and enters the TARDIS once more, at which point he finds out that his time jetpack is not just a time machine, it is also a bomb. Yeah, of course, Josiah W. Dogbolter did not care about Death's Head at all. He was just using him as a vehicle to get at the Doctor, and if he can take out his target and his bounty hunter at the same time, that's just 2 birds with 1 stone. So the Doctor helps Death's Head get the backpack off, and they chunk it back into Dogbolter's headquarters, just kind of nuking the— oh god damn it, I didn't say his full name. That was an actual mistake, but I think I'm just gonna leave it in because that was kind of funny. My mistake aside, Josiah W. Dogbolter explodes and the unlikely pair leave the scene, with the Doctor dropping Death's Head off somewhere far away. They then have a kind of intense scene which is used to set up Death's Head's expansion as a character going forward. In classic cocky fashion, DH basically just tells the Doctor, hey, we're good for now, but if we meet a 3rd time, then I'm going to finish you off. The Doctor does not take this seriously at all. The Time Lord tells DH in no uncertain terms that no matter how many weapons he might be able to have, the thing that he fundamentally lacks is change. He can live for 1,000 years, but since the Doctor is organic and DH is ultimately just a robot, he is fundamentally static, and unless he is able to grow and evolve, he will always remain the exact same way that he is. Then, with the very pointed words, "You're just a machine, a tool, and nobody needs you," the Doctor closes the door of the TARDIS and leaves Death's Head stranded on the roof of the Baxter building. Yeah, you heard me right. He leaves him on the roof of the fucking Baxter building! This is how Death's Head finally enters the Marvel universe. The Doctor just kinda drops him off on top of the Fantastic Four's headquarters and leaves. God, what was Marvel UK doing? How were they allowed to get away with this? I was talking to a buddy of mine as I was working on this video, and he pointed out that somehow this moment has like the exact same vibe as an MCU end credit scene which sets up the next project. He's absolutely right, and I laughed so hard when he pointed this out because you can visualize exactly how it would go. The movie ends with the conversation between DH and the Doctor gets back in the TARDIS and we see him go off on the next adventure. Credits roll, then it cuts back into a close-up of Death's Head. He says something about how he needs to figure out where the Doctor left him. The camera zooms out and we get the Fantastic Four music stinger as it shows the logo. It really is shot for shot that kind of setup. Even wilder is the fact that that is not the end of the series. That happens in Death's Head issue 8, and Death's Head issue 9 is him fighting the Fantastic Four. Unsurprisingly, the arrival of a super robot on the Fantastic Four's roof triggers a bunch of automated security protocols, and as DH fights both them and the team, some of the automated systems get damaged, causing them to target everyone superhuman in the vicinity, which of course includes the Fantastic Four themselves. Since this was a genuine misunderstanding and Death's Head really did not want to be there, he reconciles with the team at least temporarily, helps them take down the systems, and actually saves Franklin Richards in the process, which of course gains him the Four's favor. He doesn't do this out of the goodness of his own heart, of course. Death's Head very rarely does anything for free, and the main reason that he agrees to help is the Fantastic Four promise they can use their technology to send him back to his own time if he does. Even still, there is a moment during this where one of the machines is about to explode and Death's Head almost leaves, saving his own life at the cost of the kid, but he doesn't do it. While Death's Head is not a hero, he's not like abandon a helpless child level of villain, you know? This leads to what is maybe my favorite interaction in the character's entire history, where the Four are thanking him for saving their son and sending him back with one of their time platforms, and as they're doing this, there's like a kind of stereotypical line where they're like, maybe you're not so bad, you're a little rough around the edges, but you seem to be what passes for a superhero in your time. And Death's Head goes, no, you were absolutely right to be worried about me. I do kill people for a living. Then we have one of the funniest panels in the video where Reed is like, oh crap, we absolutely should not be letting this guy go. And yes, I will zoom in on Reed's part here so that you can screenshot this and use it as a reaction image if you want. I have already done so and sent it to many of my friends. Even better, this is not just a joke. This scene actually has huge effects on the story, because after processing that sending DH back means that more people are going to die, Reed tries to cancel the time travel, and while he doesn't cancel it completely, he does cut the journey off before DH gets back to where he wanted to go. Instead of ending up back in the year 8000 whatever, where he had set up for himself, Death's Head ends up in the year 2020 and gets into a conflict with that era's Iron Man, Arno Stark, otherwise known as Iron Man, but for publication purposes, often called Iron Man 2020. This is the final issue of DH's solo series, but it immediately leads into another project focused around him, a graphic novel titled Death's Head: The Body in Question. This is where finally, after years and plenty of crossovers, we get to learn the character's origin. Let's recap exactly what we know about the character so far, just so we're all on the exact same page. Up until this point, all that we really knew about Death's Head was that he was an alien robot bounty hunter, and the recap is over now. The body in question revolves around Death's Head returning to his home world, a pocket dimension called Styrikos. And this is where things are just going to be unconnected to everything else that's happened before, but at this point, 20 minutes into the video, you should be completely braced for that, so don't blame me if you're not. Styrikos is a magical dimension for some reason. Because this storyline already has like 4 different flavors of sci-fi in it, I'm sure adding magic is going to make things so much more logical. The realm was ruled by a warrior mage named Lupex, and if you're immediately noticing that Lupex looks kind of like a human version of Death's Head, that is not a coincidence at all. Lupex was incredibly powerful, both in terms of magic and technology, but he possessed so much power that he had a bad habit of burning out his physical body. So, to survive, he would transfer his consciousness into multiple bodies, burning them out as he went and just killing a bunch of people in the process. Eventually, he got tired of this and had the idea to build himself a robot body. That robotic shell was the thing that would become Death's Head, but Lupex never actually got to inhabit it. The personality that DH would develop was not something the Warlord had intended. That aspect was added in secret by one of Lupex's apprentices. This woman's name was Pyra, and she did not like Lupex very much because he had killed her boyfriend. So, understandably wanting revenge on him for that, she sabotaged the robot body project by giving it its own consciousness. Her hope for this was that Lupex would try to possess the robot as planned, but then the robot's inherent consciousness would fight back and overwhelm him. However, this never actually ended up happening because the body was stolen. Who exactly stole Death's Head is kind of weirdly never confirmed. They only refer to the person as parties unknown and never go into any more detail. However, for my opinion, it was almost certainly the Doctor. This is never actually directly implied in any way, but based on some events we've already covered, and more importantly, some events that we will cover shortly, that is both the most fun answer and the one that makes the most sense, so that is what I'm going to choose to believe. Regardless of who took the robot, the important part of the timing is that this happened before Death's Head actually went online. So when he activated, he was already gone from Styrikos and therefore did not know the circumstances of his origin. At the point where he returns, he finds all this out, and when he knows his entire history, he ends up killing several of his former masters, and from there on goes to have solo adventures. Now, unfortunately, we have to do something kind of confusing with the timeline and sort of split it into 2 sections. I don't like doing this, but this is how it has to go since I am presenting these comics in publication order. For the next couple of minutes, we are not going to be talking about quote-unquote present-day Death's Head. We are going to backtrack and talk about what happens to him after he leaves Styrikos. Somebody, probably the Doctor, takes the robot and puts him somewhere else. Then the robot wakes up, does not know what his origin is, but starts work as a bounty hunter anyway. In this period, amazingly, Death's Head does have adventures in the Marvel Universe, and not only that, he briefly works as a peacekeeping agent in league with the TVA. We don't get to see too much of his adventures during this time, but we know that they do happen. He meets She-Hulk, he meets a bunch of Marvel villains, he is absolutely a Marvel character for some indeterminate amount of time shortly after leaving Styrikos. Then, in a very vague, hand-wavy move by Marvel, he is transported to the Transformers universe. Once again, they never explicitly confirm who does this, but it is very, very heavily implied to be the Doctor. They never say this outright, but we do see both DH and the Doctor end up at the same party at a weird space station called Marothea, which exists outside of time. While the writing is a little hard to parse, it seems that this is a version of Death's Head who has not yet met the Doctor, but a version of the 7th Doctor who does know who Death's Head is. This comic ends by implying that the Doctor puts Death's Head in the TARDIS and then drops him off somewhere, and while again, one more time, it never explicitly says where this is, you can kind of infer that he drops him off in the Transformers universe so that Death's Head will eventually do that whole thing with Unicron, jump into the time portal, collide with the TARDIS, and all the destined things will work out as they are supposed to. At this point, I think we could all do with a recap, me very much included, so let's take a second and compare the two timelines. From a publication standpoint, Death's Head was introduced in Transformers, and then through meddling by the Doctor, ended up in the Marvel Universe. Then he found out about his origin on Styrokos, and they kind of just retconned in that he also did Marvel stuff before Transformers, but that was absolutely a retcon. In-universe, Death's Head was created on Styrokos, then probably because of the Doctor trying to make sure events worked out properly, he went on various adventures, traveling through time in the Marvel Universe, etc., etc. At some point, he comes into contact with the Doctor again, the Doctor takes him to the Transformers world, he leaves the Transformers world through the time portal, meets the Doctor one more time, or from Death's Head's perspective, for the first time, and the Doctor drops him off back in the Marvel Universe, which is where we get to pick things up. Is this extremely weird and kind of bad? Yeah, absolutely it is, but to be fair, you can sort of just summarize it as the Doctor does a lot of weird time shenanigans with this robot, and at least for Doctor Who, that is par for the course. The biggest problem with this is that since Death's Head's story is so non-linear, it is damn near impossible to get a linear structure when it comes to his next several Marvel appearances. Since this character absolutely has a cult following, he shows up in a bunch of random things. He's been in a Sword comic, he had another solo series in 2019 where he met the Young Avengers and Hawkeye and a bunch of other popular Marvel characters, and he has a lot of isolated one-offs as well. But it's really difficult to tell you when exactly those happen, at least from DH's own perspective. We know that canonically, Death's Head has two sort of eras of action in the Marvel Universe, that being before and after his time in the Transformers world, but since he's also a time travel character, I can't exactly pin down what comics take place in each of these eras. Then there's a whole nother layer of confusion to this in DH's size. He is depicted as two distinctly different sizes, basically human and transformer, but there's not a lot of consistency as to which is which, even though there is a canon explanation for why he changed sizes, that being interference by the Doctor. We know the Doctor shrunk him down to put him in the Marvel Universe, so presumably if the Doctor put him in the Transformers universe, he was also the one that made him grow, because Death's Head was human-sized originally. But also, there are times when he is depicted as large in the Marvel Universe, and no explanation is provided, so this is probably just a weird continuity error on the part of the writers, but regardless, it is the canon we have to work with. Could I give you a more linear timeline of where I think each Death's Head comic exists within his own personal history? Yeah, I probably could, but it would take me a really, really long time to work that out, and honestly, it would also be boring. Ultimately, with how strange this character is, I don't think we need a super linear timeline. This is, after all, a Doctor Who thing, and leaving it as wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nonsense is really in character for the tone of that show. Also, we're not done. I know it probably felt like I was maybe gearing up for a conclusion right there. I did that intentionally, but we are not finished yet. There's a whole nother chapter of Death's Head that we have to cover, so I am not going to spend my valuable time making a linear timeline for a character that just really doesn't need one. We have to talk about Death's Head 2. Yeah, there's a character named Death's Head 2. This is also the reason that I established the little nickname of DH way back in the beginning, because Death's Head 2 is such a tongue twister. DH2 is way easier. Now, I'm not going to spend nearly as much time on DH2 as I did DH1. This video is mostly about the first iteration, and he is complicated enough without a sequel. But the sequel is also not technically a sequel. It's not entirely a separate entity. It is like DH1, but fused with another guy because his consciousness got absorbed by a robot. None of this is easy for me. Okay, let's just take a second and introduce an entirely separate character to this already convoluted thing. This guy is named Minion. He is a cyborg created by AIM, like the Marvel organization AIM. No Transformers or Doctor Who or other dimensional stuff in this guy's origin. He is Marvel through and through. However, he is not from the main Marvel universe. He is from one of Marvel's possible futures, one we've already addressed in this video, the year 2020, which feels way less dramatic now that we've already passed that in real time, but regardless, this was back in the 90s, and so 2020 was a distant thing. Minion is basically a Terminator. AIM creates him in the future and then sends him back into the time stream to eliminate a bunch of targets that will eventually provide problems for AIM in the future. Specifically, he has 106 targets that he needs to kill, and Death's Head is on that list. Very importantly, Minion is also supposed to upgrade himself as he goes about his work. When he takes out a target, he assimilates parts of that target into himself and his own programming, giving him new abilities. Death's Head is one of his last targets, number 105 out of 106 to be specific, and he does successfully kill the robot. The problem with this is that Death's Head is weird. He is a strange, complex being, since he was designed as a vessel for Lupex and then given sentience as a form of rebellion, all that complicated stuff. So when Minion attempts to absorb DH, he doesn't overwrite him completely and messes up all of his circuitry. This will prove to be a problem shortly, but at this point, Minion does not stop his mission. After all, he only has one target remaining, Subject 106, Reed Richards. Minion tries to kill Reed, but before he can make this happen, one of his own creators interferes. This woman, named Dr. Evelyn, has noticed that her robot is behaving strangely, and so even though she's AIM and evil, she wants to get it under control. She goes to Reed, explains the situation with Death's Head, and since Reed already knows DH, he is able to help figure things out. Thus, Mr. Fantastic is able to unscramble some of Minion's programming, but he does so in a way that allows the Death's Head personality to gain full control. Thus, Minion becomes Death's Head 2. DH2 is weird, and I mean everything in this video has been weird, but in this case I mean weird in a way that I think is distinctly less fun. First off, he is not technically a new character. In the timeline sense, DH2 is just a continuation of the original DH, because the original one is dead at this point, and then his consciousness has been uploaded into this one. Whether it's exactly the same being or more of an uploaded copy, I don't really know, but also in this case it doesn't really matter. The reason we're not really spending a lot of time on him is that DH2 is less good and less people like him. This character kind of strips a lot of what made the original one unique. He obviously doesn't have any of the licensing weirdness, he doesn't have the vocal quirks or unique personality, and his design is really clearly just trying to capitalize on Alien and Predator aesthetics that were very popular in the 90s when this sort of edgy vibe was king. Funny enough, while DH2 never got the cult following that the original did, Marvel seemed to like him a lot more, at least for a short period of time. Technically, this version has more comic appearances than the original, but the vast majority of them are crammed into just a couple of years in the early 90s, and he very rarely appears in the modern day. This does serve to further complicate the Death's Head timeline though, because technically, again, this is the future of the original robot body. Like, that one gets destroyed and then becomes this one. But this one has not appeared in a comic outside of an isolated one-shot since 2014, whereas the original DH is getting whole miniseries dedicated just to him. And if that wasn't enough, there are, of course, comics where both of them are on panel at the exact same time, because they are time travel characters, so they can do that. You see why I didn't want to bother making a linear timeline for the character? It would just be annoying. It would be annoying. Thankfully though, that actually brings us to a point where I am pretty happy concluding this video. There are more stories about Death's Head, both versions of Death's Head in fact, but like I've stated a lot, I've had to repeat myself many times, such is the nature of time travel videos, a lot of them are isolated arcs that can kind of be thrown in at any point within the character's very convoluted, twisty Jeremy-Bearimy of a history. This video honestly barely touches on DH in Marvel and the various crossovers he's had with tons of characters all across the board. It is really just about his origin and his universe hopping. Could I probably do a 2-hour in-depth video on Death's Head exclusively and every single adventure he's had? Yes, I could, but I'd kinda rather stick forks in my eyes. But in this case, I'm not using that as an insult to the character, that is kind of how he is intended to be. Death's Head very rarely gets solo projects, but when he does, they're usually extremely self-aware. Hell, the whole storyline where Minion absorbs and replaces him happens in a comic literally titled The Incomplete Death's Head. Not the complete, like the complete collection. They know exactly what they're doing. But he's fun, though. Despite all the nonsense, Death's Head is objectively a very fun character to read, and the whole bounty hunting thing plus his very unique personality means that whenever he shows up in the middle of something else, you still have an idea of what you're getting. Let's call back to the conversation that DH1 had with the Doctor, where the Time Lord says that DH is robotic and will never change or grow and evolve. The Doctor calls this a weakness, and I suppose in a lore sense that is true, but from a comic book perspective, this is actually Death's Head's greatest strength. I kinda set up that this was the lead into a character arc that Death's Head may or may not go on, and I also said several times that he is not a good guy at this point in the storyline. But that was sort of a setup just for the conclusion, because he never gets a character arc, and that's a good thing. After existing in the comic book space for so long, and also reading a lot of DH books specifically for this video, he gives me the sense of a monster of the week type character that somehow gained a cult following. His personality is always the same, his motivations are usually the same, his vibe is constant. But because his vibe is consistently fun, and his timeline means he can be wherever and whenever at any given point, that means every single time Death's Head shows up, he's going to have a bunch of fans be very excited about it. And at the end of the day, or beginning of the day, or middle of the day, or whatever the TARDIS decides to drop him off, that is all this type of comic book character needs to be, and so I enjoy him very much. Now, that certainly felt like a concluding line, but before I get to my advertisements, there is one more big thing that I have to address: the canon status of all of this. The implications of everything that we've discussed are truly crazy in terms of multiverse stuff. The Transformers are connected to the Marvel multiverse, as is the Doctor, so like, where was the Doctor when the multiverse was getting destroyed during Secret Wars? What does any of this mean? Simple, actually. It doesn't. It doesn't mean anything. Don't overthink these kinds of comic book crossovers. That's not what they're meant for. Did you have fun? Cool. That's the only canon explanation you're gonna get, and that's the only one you need. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed. No more conclusion fake outs. I already did that twice today, so this is the real one. Biggest announcement of the day is a usual one. I have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can get early and ad-free access to all of my videos and an exclusive video every month. I'll do a very small teaser now. It's obviously not out at the time of this posting, but I am doing something kind of different for the July Patreon exclusive, and I think people are gonna like it a lot, so now is a good time to go sign up for that. My username there is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to my Patreon in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find, and making videos for you guys is my full-time job, so extra triple shout out to all you guys who already support me over there. Lastly, big shout out to the artist I work with for these, Ruben Perez. He drew the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you for the last half hour. I always love working with him, so go check out his stuff as well. And now, I don't really have anything to say here. Originally, the line about addressing canon and just having fun with it was going to be like the final bit of the video, but I wanted people to actually hear it and figured that very understandably a lot of people would click off during the little advertisements. So now I don't have an ending line. Bye, see you next time.